You ever wonder if the things we see in mirrors are real? What if, just for a moment, the reflection staring back at you wasn't just you, but something else? Something watching, waiting, lurking just beneath the surface. That's the kind of thought that keeps you awake at night, isn't it? Well, let me tell you a story. One that's haunted me for years, and it all started with an old, dusty mirror. I'm Michael. I'm 35 now, but this happened back when I was 19, back when I didn't believe in things like ghosts, spirits, or any of that supernatural stuff. At the time, I was living in a small town in Ohio, a place where nothing ever happens. But one day, I found something that changed everything. It was a warm summer afternoon, and I was at an estate sale with my two best friends, Jake and Sarah. We weren't really looking for anything in particular, just some cool vintage stuff. We walked through the house, browsing through old furniture, paintings, and dusty trinkets that had been left behind by whoever lived there. That's when I saw it. The mirror. It wasn't like any mirror I'd ever seen before. It was massive, with an ornate gold frame that looked like it belonged in a mansion. The glass was dark, almost black, but when I looked into it, my reflection was sharp, clearer than in any other mirror I'd ever seen. There was something about it, something that drew me in. It was almost like it was calling to me. "Dude, that thing is creepy," Jake said, standing next to me. "Look at it. The reflection is weird." Sarah, always the logical one, rolled her eyes. "It's just an old mirror. Probably has some dust on the glass or something." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I didn't know why, but I had to have it. I ended up buying the mirror for next to nothing. The woman running the estate sale seemed almost relieved to get rid of it. That should have been my first warning sign. Later that evening, we brought the mirror back to my apartment. We set it up in the hallway, right outside my bedroom. And that's when things started to get strange. At first, it was small stuff, reflections that didn't seem quite right. I'd walk past the mirror, and for a split second, I'd see something in the corner of my eye. Something that wasn't me. But every time I looked back, it was gone. Jake and Sarah thought I was just being paranoid. "Dude, you're freaking yourself out," Jake said, laughing. "It's just a mirror." But then it got worse, much worse. One night I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard a faint noise. It was coming from the hallway, just outside my door. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest, and listened. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone was gently knocking on the wall. I got out of bed and opened the door. Nothing. The hallway was empty, and the mirror stood there, silent and still. I stared at it for a moment, feeling a chill crawl down my spine. I was about to turn away when I saw it. A figure, standing just behind my reflection. I froze. It was dark, but I could see its outline. Tall, thin, with long, spindly arms that seemed to stretch out towards me. Its face was pale, almost skeletal, with hollow eyes that stared right through me. I blinked, and it was gone. I stood there, my heart racing, trying to convince myself that I hadn't just seen what I thought I saw. But deep down, I knew. Something was wrong with that mirror. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in bed, staring at the door, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the house was silent. Too silent. The next morning, I called Jake and Sarah. I told them what I'd seen, but they didn't believe me. They thought I was just stressed, maybe overworked from my job at the time. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Days passed and things only got worse. I'd see the figure more often, always standing just behind my reflection in the mirror. Sometimes I'd hear whispers when I walked past it, soft voices that seemed to come from the glass itself. At night, I'd wake up to the sound of scratching, like fingernails dragging across the surface of the mirror. It was driving me insane. One night, Sarah came over to check on me. She still didn't believe in the whole haunted mirror thing, but she could see how tired and freaked out I was. "Maybe you should get rid of it," she said, looking at the mirror, "just to put your mind at ease." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But something wouldn't let me. It was like the mirror had a hold on me, like it didn't want to leave. And deep down, I was terrified of what might happen if I tried to get rid of it. That night, everything changed. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of shattering glass. I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding, and ran into the hallway. The mirror had cracked, a huge jagged line running down the center of the glass. But that wasn't the worst part. Standing in the reflection, staring back at me from the other side of the broken glass, was the figure. It was closer now, its face pressed against the mirror, grinning with a twisted, unnatural smile. And then it spoke. "Michael, now, before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever seen something in a mirror that you couldn't explain? Maybe a shadow, or a figure that wasn't really there? Tell me maybe in the comments below where you're watching from. And if you've ever had an experience like this, I want to know how many of you believe in the supernatural, because what happened next, well, let's just say it'll make you think twice the next time you look into a mirror." The sound of my name coming from the figure in the mirror sent a chill down my spine. I stood there, frozen, unable to move or speak. Its voice wasn't loud, it was a whisper, soft, but full of malice, like it was enjoying my fear. I took a step back, my eyes locked on the figure, its smile growing wider, revealing rows of sharp, crooked teeth. My heart was racing, my breathing shallow. I didn't know what to do. Run, scream, destroy the mirror? But before I could react, the lights in the hallway flickered, and in that split second, the figure vanished. The mirror was cracked, yes, but the reflection was just me, again, alone, staring at myself, panting in terror. I rushed back into my room, slamming the door shut behind me, my mind racing. Was I losing it? Could this really be happening? Every logical part of me wanted to believe it was just stress, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But deep down, I knew this was real, too real. I didn't sleep at all that night. The whispers from the hallway crept under the door, like the figure was still there, waiting, watching. By the time morning came, I was exhausted, barely able to keep my eyes open. But I had to do something. I had to figure out what was happening. I called Jake and Sarah again, practically begging them to come over. When they arrived, they could see how wrecked I was. Dark circles under my eyes, hands trembling. "This has gone too far, man," Jake said, looking at the cracked mirror. "We need to get rid of this thing." Sarah, who still hadn't fully bought into the idea of a haunted mirror, nodded. "It's definitely messing with your head. Let's take it out of here." We grabbed the mirror, careful not to touch the sharp edges of the crack, and carried it outside. I felt a strange sense of relief as we set it down on the curb, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But deep inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Just as we turned to go back inside, a car pulled up. An old woman stepped out, her eyes wide, as she stared at the mirror. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice shaky. I explained how I had bought it at an estate sale, and her expression darkened. "That mirror, it's cursed. I've seen it before. It belonged to a woman who lived in this town over 100 years ago. She used it to summon something evil. My stomach dropped. Summon something. What are you talking about? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The woman sighed. Her name was Eleanor Graves. She was obsessed with the occult, always dabbling in things she shouldn't have. One night, she performed a ritual in front of that mirror. The next morning, she was found dead in her house, her body twisted and mangled, like something had attacked her from inside the mirror. I stared at the cracked glass, my mind racing. Could that figure I'd seen be what Eleanor had summoned? "I'm warning you," the woman continued. "Destroy it, burn it, smash it, do whatever you need to do, but don't keep it. If you don't, it'll come for you." Jake and Sarah exchanged nervous glances. "She's probably just some local crazy," Jake whispered, but I could see the fear in his eyes. I wasn't willing to take any chances. We grabbed a hammer and some old rags, preparing to smash the mirror to pieces and then burn whatever was left. But as soon as the hammer touched the glass, a sharp, piercing scream echoed through the air. We all froze. It was the same voice, the same one I'd heard from the figure in the mirror. "Michael." The hammer fell from my hand, clattering onto the pavement. The mirror was vibrating, like something inside it was trying to break free. Without thinking, we grabbed the rags, doused them in gasoline, and set the mirror on fire. The flames roared to life, but instead of feeling relieved, the air around us grew colder. Dark, heavy clouds gathered overhead, and the ground beneath our feet began to tremble. The fire wasn't destroying the mirror. It was making things worse. Suddenly, the glass shattered with a deafening crack, and out of the smoke and flames, the figure emerged. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was real. Standing before us was the same tall, spindly figure I'd seen in the mirror, but now it was even more grotesque. Its skin was gray and mottled, its limbs unnaturally long, and its eyes, those hollow black eyes, stared right through me, as if it could see every dark corner of my soul. Sarah screamed, and Jake pulled her back, but we were frozen in place, too terrified to move. The figure took a step toward me, its twisted smile widening as it reached out with one long, bony hand. "Michael!" I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. But just as the figure was about to touch me, it stopped. Its smile faded, replaced by something that almost looked like fear. And then just like that, it disappeared. The air grew warm again, the trembling stopped, and the dark clouds parted, revealing the clear blue sky. We stood there in silence, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The mirror was gone, completely shattered, reduced to nothing but ash and shards of glass. But the figure, I knew it wasn't truly gone. It was still out there somewhere, watching, waiting. Now that the story's heating up, here's another question for you. What would you do if you saw something in a mirror that wasn't supposed to be there? Would you break it or leave it alone? Let me know in the comments. And if you're brave enough, share any creepy experiences you've had with mirrors. You never know. Maybe you're not the only one watching. The days that followed were strange. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. No more whispers, no more shadows moving in the dark corners of my room. It was like a heavy fog had lifted from my mind. Jake, Sarah, and I didn't talk about what happened. It was as if we were all too scared to bring it up, like mentioning the figure would somehow bring it back. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That figure, the way it had stopped right before touching me. Why? And the way it disappeared, almost as if it was afraid of something. But what? A few days later, I got a call from Jake. His voice was tense, barely controlled. "Michael, I need you to come over, now." When I arrived at his place, Sarah was already there, sitting on the couch looking pale and shaken. Jake didn't waste time with pleasantries. He held up his phone, showing me a photo. My stomach turned as I stared at the screen. It was a picture of his bathroom mirror, cracked down the middle. And in the reflection, barely visible, was the same figure. The twisted smile, the hollow eyes, staring right at the camera. "We got rid of the mirror," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We destroyed it." Jake shook his head. "I don't think we destroyed anything, man. I think we set it free." A week passed, and I started seeing it again. Not just in mirrors, in reflections on windows, on my phone screen, in the water. It was never there for long, just a brief flicker, but enough to remind me that it was still out there. The worst part was the dreams. Every night I'd find myself in the same dark hallway, standing in front of a mirror. But this time, the figure wasn't just watching. It was moving closer, step by step, each night getting nearer, reaching out to me with its long, bony fingers. I stopped sleeping. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, it was waiting for me, creeping closer and closer. And every time I woke up, I felt like a little more of myself was slipping away, like the figure was draining something from me. Jake and Sarah weren't faring any better. Sarah had started seeing the figure in her own apartment, and Jake, well, he didn't talk about it, but I could see it in his eyes. The fear, the exhaustion, whatever we had unleashed, it was following us, and it wasn't going to stop. We had to figure out what was happening, and fast. Desperate for answers, I started digging into Eleanor Graves' past, searching through old newspapers, online forums, anything that could give me a clue about what we were dealing with. That's when I stumbled upon a name: the Watcher. According to the legend, the Watcher was a spirit bound to mirrors, cursed to exist between worlds. It fed on fear, growing stronger with each person who glimpsed it in the reflection. Once it latched onto you, it would follow you, haunting your every step, slowly driving you insane until it could finally claim your soul. The only way to break the curse, the legend said, was to confront it, to face the Watcher head-on in the mirror, where it first appeared, and defeat it. It sounded insane, but at this point I was willing to try anything. I told Jake and Sarah about the legend, and though they were both skeptical, they agreed we had no other choice. We returned to my apartment, standing once more in front of the empty spot where the cursed mirror had been, armed with candles and salt, because every paranormal guide on the internet insisted they'd help. We set up a ritual. It felt ridiculous, but we were desperate. The plan was simple: face the Watcher in a mirror, draw it out, and break the curse. Easy, right? We lit the candles, sprinkled the salt in a circle, and waited. Minutes passed and nothing happened. I started to feel foolish, thinking this was all just some elaborate joke. But then the air grew cold, the lights flickered, and in the faint glow of the candlelight I saw it. The figure, standing in the reflection of the window across the room. It was closer than it had ever been before, its twisted grin wider than ever. Slowly it stepped towards the glass, its bony fingers pressing against the surface as if trying to break through. "Michael?" The whisper sent a shiver down my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was it. This was our chance to stop it. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, though my voice trembled with every word. The figure stopped, its smile faltering for just a moment, and then without warning, it lunged forward, crashing through the glass, and into the room with us. Chaos erupted. The candles went out. The room plunged into darkness. I could hear Jake and Sarah screaming, feel the cold air rushing around us as the figure moved closer. But I couldn't run. I had to face it. I had to end this. Grabbing the nearest mirror, I held it up in front of me, forcing myself to look into its hollow eyes. The Watcher stopped, inches away from me, its breath cold against my skin. "Michael," it whispered again. But this time its voice was weaker, less certain. With all the strength I could muster, I smashed the mirror to the ground. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces, and with it, the figure let out a scream that shook the walls. And then, silence. The air grew warm again. The lights flickered back on. The Watcher was gone. We stood there, shaken but alive, staring at the broken shards of glass on the floor. It was over. The curse was broken. Or so we thought. Weeks passed after that night, and life slowly started to return to normal. Or at least as normal as it could be after everything we'd been through. The figure was gone. No more shadows in the mirrors. No more cold whispers in the dark. It felt like a nightmare that we'd somehow survived. But something still nagged at the back of my mind. The legend of the Watcher didn't sit right with me. If it fed on fear and thrived on reflections, how could breaking a single mirror have been enough to defeat it? Jake and Sarah seemed relieved, ready to move on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not yet. Every time I passed by a mirror or caught my reflection in a window, I tensed, expecting to see that twisted smile staring back at me. And then the dreams started again. At first they were subtle. I'd find myself in that same dark hallway, standing in front of a mirror. But this time, there was no figure, just me, staring at my reflection. But each night, my reflection looked a little different, like something was off. The eyes were too hollow, the smile too wide, like it wasn't really me looking back. One night, I woke up with a start, drenched in sweat, only to realize that I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, and there it was, the mirror from my dream, standing at the foot of my bed, and in it, my reflection, smiling that same twisted smile. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The fear had wrapped around my throat like a noose, suffocating me. I blinked, and the mirror was gone. But the fear remained, deep in my gut. I knew what I had to do. I had to go back to where it all started, back to Eleanor Graves' mansion. There had to be something we missed, something that could explain why the Watcher was still haunting me. Jake and Sarah didn't want to come. They thought I was paranoid, that I was letting the fear get to me. But I couldn't let it go. So one cold, foggy morning, I drove back to the mansion alone. The place was just as eerie as I remembered, the towering structure looming over me like a specter from the past. The front door creaked open as I pushed it, the air inside stale and thick with dust. It was like time had stopped in this place, like the house was trapped in a forgotten era, waiting for someone to unlock its secrets. I wandered through the dark, empty halls, my footsteps echoing against the walls. Everything was exactly as we had left it, the broken furniture, the cracked windows, the silence so thick you could feel it pressing against your skin. And then I found it. In the back room, hidden behind a layer of dust and cobwebs, was a small wooden door. It hadn't been there the last time we visited, or maybe we just hadn't noticed it. But something about it felt wrong. I hesitated for a moment, but the pull was too strong. I had to see what was behind it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. My heart raced. but I forced myself to descend. Each step felt like it was taking me deeper into the heart of something ancient, something evil. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a small, dimly lit room. In the center of the room was a mirror, standing on a pedestal, covered with a thick black cloth. My breath caught in my throat. This was it, the source of everything. I reached out, my hand trembling, and pulled the cloth away. The mirror was old, its surface covered in scratches and stains, but it was unmistakable. This was the mirror that had been haunting me in my dreams, the mirror that held the Watcher. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at my reflection. It looked normal at first, just me, tired and worn from weeks of fear and sleepless nights. But then slowly my reflection started to change. The eyes grew darker, the smile wider, until it wasn't me anymore. It was the Watcher, staring back at me with that same twisted grin. "Michael." The whisper echoed through the room, soft and chilling. "You thought you could escape me." I stumbled back, but there was nowhere to run. The room was too small, too suffocating. The Watcher's reflection started to crawl out of the mirror, its bony fingers stretching toward me. I had no plan, no way to stop it. The salt, the candles, the ritual, none of it had worked, and now I was trapped. But then I remembered something from the legend. The Watcher feeds on fear. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe. Slowly, steadily, I pushed the fear down, locking it away. I wasn't going to give it what it wanted, not this time. "I'm not afraid of you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You don't control me." The Watcher hesitated, its twisted form flickering like a dying flame. The air around me grew colder, the room darker, but I held my ground. "I'm not afraid." With those words, the figure let out a blood-curdling scream, its form shattering like glass. The mirror cracked and splintered, pieces of it falling to the ground in a shower of shards. And then, just like that, it was over. Or so I thought. The house was quiet again, the mirror nothing more than a pile of broken glass on the floor. But as I turned to leave, I caught one final glimpse of my reflection in the shards. And there, in the smallest piece of glass, I saw it. The faintest hint of a smile. The Watcher, still lurking, still waiting. I left the mansion that day, but the feeling never went away. The Watcher may have been weakened, but it wasn't gone. And I knew, deep down, that it never would be. Because once the Watcher finds you, it never truly lets go. The weeks that followed were tense. Every time I passed a mirror, my heart raced. I tried to avoid reflective surfaces as much as possible. No mirrors, no windows, not even the screen of my phone. But there was always that lingering thought. Was the Watcher still watching? Was it waiting for the perfect moment to strike again? Jake and Sarah had moved on with their lives, blissfully unaware of the creeping dread that still haunted me. They thought it was over, that we had defeated whatever evil had been tied to that cursed mansion. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. One night, a few weeks after my encounter at the mansion, I found myself standing in front of my bathroom mirror, staring into my own reflection. Everything looked normal, but my nerves were frayed, and I couldn't help but feel like I wasn't alone. I leaned closer, peering into my own eyes, waiting for something, anything, to move. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that it was all in my head, just the aftershocks of a traumatic experience. But then it happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, the smallest flicker of movement. I turned my head sharply, expecting to see nothing but my own reflection. But there, in the mirror's corner, was a figure. It wasn't me. It wasn't the Watcher. It was someone else entirely. A woman, pale, with long dark hair that clung to her face. Her eyes were hollow, and her lips twisted into a smile that chilled me to the bone. She wasn't standing in the room with me. She was inside the mirror. My body froze. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The woman in the mirror raised a hand and pressed her palm against the glass, her eyes locked on mine. And then in a voice that was barely a whisper, she spoke. "Help me!" I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The room seemed to spin around me as I struggled to comprehend what was happening. Who was she? How did she get there? And then just as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. The mirror reflected nothing but my own horrified face. I sank to the floor, my mind racing. What had I seen? Was she connected to the Watcher, or was this something else entirely? I had no answers, only more questions. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences grew more frequent. I would catch glimpses of her in every reflective surface, in the windows, in puddles, even in the shine of my kitchen countertop. And each time, she looked more desperate, her eyes pleading for help. I knew I had to find out who she was, but the thought of going back to that mansion terrified me. What if the Watcher was still there, waiting for me to return? But I didn't have a choice. The woman's presence was becoming unbearable, and I couldn't live like this anymore. So once again, I found myself driving back to Eleanor Graves' mansion, unsure of what I would find, but knowing that this was the only way to end it. The mansion was just as I had left it, but this time, I wasn't just searching for answers about the Watcher. I was searching for her. I wandered through the rooms, calling out into the emptiness, asking for her to show herself. There was no response, only the silence of the house wrapping itself around me like a shroud. And then as I entered the room where I had found the cursed mirror, I saw her. She stood in the corner, her back to me, her figure barely visible in the dim light. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting mine, and for the first time, I saw the truth in them. She wasn't a ghost. She wasn't a victim. She was the Watcher. Before I could react, she lunged at me, her fingers cold and sharp as they wrapped around my throat. I struggled, gasping for air, but her grip was unrelenting. The room seemed to spin as the air was sucked from my lungs, and I realized, too late, that this was her plan all along. The Watcher wasn't gone. It had simply taken a new form, waiting for the right moment to strike again, and I had walked right into its trap. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I woke up, I was lying on the floor, the air thick with dust. The room was empty, and the mirror was shattered into 1,000 pieces around me. But I wasn't alone. In the broken shards of glass, I saw them, the faces, not just the woman, but countless others. All trapped inside the reflections, their eyes pleading for help. I realized in that moment that the Watcher wasn't just one entity. It was a collection of souls, trapped in the mirror's grasp, feeding on the fear of the living, and now it had added me to its collection. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My reflection stared back at me from the broken glass, and I saw it, that twisted smile, the one that didn't belong to me. I was trapped, just like all the others. If this story gave you chills or creeped you out, don't forget to hit that like button and share the video with your friends who love horror. Plus, we want to hear your thoughts. Do you think anyone can escape the Watcher's grasp? Or is everyone destined to end up like the other victims? Drop your comment below and let us know which country you're watching from.